Thank you for joining us in this session. My name is Josh Nisbet. I work for a company called CGI, which some of you are familiar with. It's a pleasure to see some familiar faces in here with us today. I'm going to go ahead and let our panel introduce themselves. I will tell you that we have some distinguished guests among us, probably folks who have traveled further than any of you to be here today in terms of mileage. And we'll let that be a literal mileage, or maybe that's figurative mileage as well. Stefan, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, thanks. Hi, everybody. My name is Stefan Becker. I'm Vice President at CGI in our federal group, where we do a lot of cloud work and support GSA, the Department of Homeland Security, Department of Labor, and other agencies with our cloud offerings. So hopefully I'll be able to share some lessons learned more from an industry and provider perspective today.
Good afternoon. I'm Dave McClure. I'm the Associate Administrator for Citizen Services and Innovative Technologies at GSA. We primarily run most of the public-facing websites for the White House and the Office of Management and Budget, data.gov, USA.gov, performance.gov, lots of things that people are using to get data out of the government these days. And we also, Vijender heads up the innovative technology side of it, so we are probably the arms and legs of the administration for cloud computing strategy, implementation, procurement, and we walk the talk. We actually, almost everything we do is in cloud environments and have been for the last 4 years. So we've kind of gotten our feet wet and can share with you a lot of scars and lessons learned today.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Vijender Patel. I'm the Deputy Associate Administrator, actually Dave's deputy at GSA, federal government, working in the Office of Citizen Services and Innovative Technologies. Pretty cool place to work, right? I mean, we work very closely with the White House, Office of Management and Budget, and the Executive Office of the President on all of the cool stuff, cloud computing, information sharing, security in the cloud. And in fact, I would say this, I've had the unique privilege of leading, representing the U.S. To governments like India and Africa, Rwanda, and Ghana just last year in influencing those countries in adopting our information sharing platforms. So it's a pretty cool place, and happy to be here.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Rick Davis. I am the CTO, or Chief Technology Officer, for CGI in the state of California. I have the pleasure, I guess, two things. One, I have the pleasure of bringing the experience of CGI and our partners to California. And two, I'm probably not the distinguished guest because I think I traveled about 100 yards to get here, unlike the gentleman sitting to my right. So thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
Thanks. So as a member of the advisory board for this forum, sitting in some of the advisory meetings, we were discussing who we could bring to the conference to provide the most value to you. And as we shared different ideas about some of the academics around cloud, some of the solutions and the widgets and the software that come with the discussion, it occurred to me that probably there would be some value if we could actually sit down and speak with some people who have implemented the things that we're talking about today. Actual people who have, from the twinkle in the eye of the executive all the way through to the continuous monitoring of an operations of cloud computing. Wouldn't it be great to meet them and to talk with them about their experiences, the things they thought about when probably years ago they were in the shoes that you are standing in today, in the chairs that you are sitting in today, thinking about what do I do about this initiative and what is it going to mean to my business? How will it change my day and the day of my teams? And so we reached out to Dave and to Vijender to come to Sacramento and to share with us some of their experiences. It's our hope that they will be able to connect with you on some of the things most pressing to you, and that along the way, Stefan and Rick and I can maybe add some color commentary, because in Washington, CGI has been, I think, characterized as a key partner in the development of the cloud infrastructure and environment that the GSA and agencies, departments within the federal government have implemented. So we have some experiences probably to share as well. With that, as we chatted about what we would do for the next 40 minutes or so, one of the ideas that came up was a rage that is sweeping the Beltway in Washington right now, and that is the Unconference. So I'm not sure if you've ever experienced an Unconference conference, but as it's been described to me, gentlemen, and keep me honest here, that is where we begin by ascertaining what are the questions, what are the hot topics that you want to know about, capturing that to a degree in some way that we can touch on it, and then allowing those who know to share their stories and their experiences to answer those questions. Is that fair? Is that about right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, first of all, is there anyone in here, so that I'm not being redundant, who was in the lunch discussion that Mr. Paul and Mr. McClure just spoke at? There's a few of you who have been. Great. Well, thank you for being there. And hopefully, if you had some questions or some spots in there that you wanted to jump into a deeper discussion on, we would absolutely welcome that here. As you think about your role and responsibility in cloud, as you think about the concerns that you have, as you've heard of or have been a part of the state executive's direction on cloud, what are the things that you are concerned about? What are the questions that you have that you bring to this room looking for answers?
So from a security perspective, one of the questions I was wondering from your cloud services provider, traditionally here in the state, where in our data centers, we have siloed areas, network servers, and so forth. Mm-hmm. And that helps us provide a separation of duties in terms of appropriate behaviors. I'm curious, when you outsource that or migrate it to a cloud service provider, what are the ways to achieve that same separation of duties or demonstration of separation of duties?
So, in some cases, first of all, I'd say before you separate or segment, to look across the different entities to see if there's a possibility of combining, that there's overlapping requirements rather than uniqueness in every one. Just as a start, it might not mean that there is, but I think that's a better starting point than saying I've got to segment everybody off in their own domains because of unique worker requirements, access control environments, and so forth. So try to find some commonality first. I think that's a good start. That's what we've had to do. There might be situations where you're running data or the interaction with the data does have a different layer or different level of requirements than some others. So this is where we get into a cloud data center actually looking more like a traditional data center, but it's still using virtualized technologies and, where possible, using data exchanges where it's allowed. So low-risk data, public-facing data, I don't think you should have a whole lot of differences across agencies in terms of how that's handled. If it is, I think that's a good starting point for the discussion. So I just, in short, I don't think you use it as an excuse for why you can't do it. It means, you remember that in the session we just did, there's a value and control matrix that you have to think about. So if you have high levels of control over your data, the value proposition from cloud tremendously decreases. There may be situations in the government where cloud can't provide the solution. Now, there are not many people saying that, but if you've evaluated your requirements and you have a conversation, or you go through a contract negotiation, or you go through a RFP process and the provider can't meet that, then that's the way the market's shaping right now. So it's kind of tug and pull. It's a tug and pull on both the provider side and the consumer side to actually do due diligence rather than accept totally the as is. And find some middle ground in between if you can.
Right. I just want to add to that. You used the word silo, and in fact, in our earlier speech, we talked about the challenges we had in the federal government. Right? I mean, going from 430 data centers in 1998 to more than 2,000 in 2010. So segmentation, silos were extremely prominent. Right? I want to use the word optimization. Right? I think cloud strategy allows the agency and the organization to really optimize security as well as the segmentation of the roles and responsibilities of the workforce. So I think the cloud deployment model provides the organizations enough flexibility from a service deployment perspective, from a cloud perspective. Dave talked about the value proposition of having private on one end of the spectrum and then having public. That's the balance I think that needs to be struck in addressing the optimization of your infrastructure in your environment and also the impact on the organization. So it's more of a art rather than a science, and that's why I think the third leg to the stool, as we talked earlier, was the fact that the organization have a unique opportunity before actually going into production to test this out, in the non-production environment, test dev environment. So there are many things that can be optimized. So.
Please.
So,
Please.
Separate question.
Please, sure.
So, moving along in the process, we built what we think is a cloud technology solution at our state data center, and so we have it. It's up and it's running. My challenge right now is going from the old way of individual silos to service delivery systems. So how did you guys build a service catalog, and then how did you implement that service catalog with software and technology for users to come into that portal, see what services, maybe the cost model, and select what they want, self-administration in some places with some workflow process for approvals and things for spending, but ultimately turning the value of this cloud technology to service delivery at a fairly rapid pace, but not losing the integrity of it.
So it's
that service model and implementation is where we are, and it's a pretty big deal.
right. So it's the transition of that service model while maintaining continuous operations of your legacy environment, right? To some extent, that's part of it as well.
Migrating from legacy to the new cloud. While we're doing that, we also want to start offering cloud services.
Right.
And so we kind of know what we want to offer, but how do we get a service catalog that people can actually acquire services from?
Great question.
Try that. Okay, so I'll give you a very pragmatic, Vijender Paul's perspective. As a former CIO, deputy CIO, one of the things we did at Department of Treasury was to really take a very comprehensive assessment of the organization in terms of how IT is delivering services to the program office, to the mission. Technology has to exist, has to be aligned to the mission needs, right? So we actually proactively conducted a sort of a 90-day assessment. And through that formal and informal assessment, we discovered that there were key opportunities in the infrastructure, in mission-critical application delivery, as well as sort of the back-end services in the data center level. So, that gave us a really good view in terms of, what are the low-hanging fruits, that would have a maximum impact, maximum ROI to the business outcome. So that sort of helped us to form a cloud strategy. And so back at Treasury and at HUD, we began a simple process of looking at that assessment and using that as our service catalog, and starting with the consolidation by virtualizing the back-end environment, reducing the physical space, leveraging capacity and performance on demand, and improving the performance profile of delivering some of the mission-critical applications. So that's one way. Another way at GSA, which our role is very unique, we provide services, consulting services in a way to other federal agencies. We've actually developed a total cost of ownership model. It's a tool that allows the agencies to really configure their environment or look at alternative analysis to see where they can achieve maximum return on investments in terms of consolidating, in terms of reducing the cost of the data center. So there are other ways that we are also exploring. But the example that I gave you before, that from a purely pragmatic perspective, has worked. Yeah.
I think Vijender pulls out a really important point, and some folks talk about cloud computing and they say, well, this is a rebranding of things that we've done before with a new, cool new name. But I think that one of the major nuances to the cloud environment is the ability to include a whole new series, a whole new layer of monitoring and controls, whether that's to be able to identify billing mechanisms and other structures that perhaps were not involved in previous versions of what cloud may be today. So,
in fact, I can give you a very, very small, very practical example. One of the challenges we had at the Office of the Comptroller of Currency, Department of Treasury, was that majority of the workforce is highly mobile. They go from bank to bank conducting banking examinations. So connectivity was a huge issue for them. So having the ability to provision network access at any time, any location was huge. So we looked at new technology, Adobe technology at the desktop level, at the laptop level, and we modernized the infrastructure. Now it allowed the examiners, depending on which location they were, they could provision Verizon or AT&T or Sprint or T-Mobile. It gave so from our perspective, yeah, that could be cloud, quote unquote cloud, but bottom line was it gave the workforce connectivity when they needed there. So that was a part of the service catalog. It worked.
So. Did you offer different levels of service? Because you have that option now to say, well, you have a gold service and a premier and a normal, and the cost structure would change based on the kind of service that you wanted?
We did.
You did?
Yep.
And did you do software as a service? So if you wanted a SharePoint site, you could provision a SharePoint site and have it up and running through a portal?
We did. Again, based on demand. Yeah. Based on, not because, SharePoint is a cool collaboration environment, but there was a fundamental need for the examiners to share information. So if that was a priority, absolutely.
One of the, and I'll give these two gentlemen and their team a lot of credit, they are, one of my favorite TV shows is Mythbusters. And I think their office, you are the Mythbusters of cloud for the federal government. I think one size does not fit all. It is not a new technology that's sweeping the beltway. It is another tool in the arsenal for getting things cheaper, faster, more reliable, more secure, and greener, which are the priorities. So it doesn't start with a technology value proposition. It really starts with very tangible business problems to solve. And I think one of the things that GSA has done is to be very cognizant about publishing success stories. And so in their team, they have aggregated over 70 or so success stories that I think many of you can look at to see the very tangible results that are not about outsourcing and siloed and having a pure cost proposition. There are many things like faster provisioning of network access that are very tangible benefits that go above and beyond cost savings, and a price rate card for services the old way and tomorrow's services in the cloud. Many of those traditional ways of looking at infrastructure costs don't apply anymore because you're not buying a server you can carry in and out, you're buying a service. And that's a very different way of thinking about procuring services and how, and this is from a vendor perspective, how to buy services is very different than having a price list to go buy a server I can carry in and out, right? And so I think that's been a very healthy dialogue across many of the federal agencies. And we have learned a lot from the vendor community of how to think about providing services and scaling services to business problems rather than having a price list for very tangible assets.
Yeah, I think that's a key difference from servicing and pricing under the more traditional shared services model that have been used in government. I think in many cases it was a single service pricing. If you wanted X, here's what it cost. It didn't matter what flavor of that you wanted. There tended to be a simplification. And I think what cloud does is allow you to ask yourself, what is it the customer is asking for that would be conducive for me to set up in a cloud environment that not only provisions it in half the time, but in half the cost, and focus on segmenting your services into those cloud and non-cloud environments. Again, you don't want to throw everything in the cloud environments by any token. But I think it forces the CIO or IT organization and the business to come together and decide, make those kinds of decisions based on cost, quality, timeliness, what's important to the business side.
So an important principle to embrace if you're going to be able to do that is transparency. You're going to have to be able to monitor your environment, and with that monitoring comes a much increased level of transparency, both to your executives, to the public at large. Could you talk for a minute, Dave and Vijender, about the paradigm shift that you had to go through to embrace transparency and what the GSA did to do that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a leverage tool, no matter how painful it is. I think the transparency between how you're running your operations and being completely dashboard transparent oriented in what your service levels, pricing, and performance are, and asking, what are the targets that you're trying to hit, and be absolutely transparent about that. And learning how to communicate that to the business side for the reasons that we just talked about. It also means that a service provider also has to be transparent. So this is a real, sticking point in the cloud space, because we are asking cloud service providers to not only go through enormous types of inspection and auditing and prying open, the tops of servers to see where things really are, but to also share information on cost and performance and tremendous focus on SLAs, so that it is as transparent as it can be. As I said in that session before, it's not faith-based computing. You have to actually
trust but verify.
You have to show me. You have to show me I'm from Missouri, that it's costing X and that you're delivering it consistently that way. So I think a lot of the dashboards and monitoring processes that you're going to see, at least in the federal level, that we're putting in place is going to be painful. It's going to be painful for CIOs because, he's been a CIO. He'll tell you you're in competition when you start having these public dashboards go up showing how inefficient. Vijender mentioned 20% average server utilization. I'm a CIO and I'm going to go tell the world that I'm utilizing 20% of my servers. Maybe I have a business case for that. Maybe I got spiked demand and I need to do it. But in most cases, we're just mismanaging the environment. So it really, transparency is a real lever for change. Change management is really difficult, but when you have openness to what's going on, you can use it to your advantage. So.
And I think it's working. I mean, I think when the former federal CIO issued a mandate, I guess, for the IT dashboard with the pictures of the CIOs on the dashboard. Oh my gosh! I mean, the IT. Vijender Patel there,
about this.
But you know what? I mean, that was an incredible impetus for the CIOs to be more aware about the transparency. And then with the service provider, it became a partnership because the stakes are much higher now. The visibility, the transparency is extremely high. So, and that's going even beyond just the IT investment. Now, even in security, for example, as we look to leverage FedRAMP, right? The fact that third-party assessors are reviewing the compliance of the CSPs. I mean, that information becomes available to us and available to the agency who are concerned with the ATOs. So I think that transparency in the long run. I mean, I think it's a win-win situation for all of us.
I think on the vendor side, we have that same note in the fact that when you move from how many megahertz is this box to how many cores is this to more of a service level approach, that enables us to put together a package that's less concerned about the contents of a box and more how we're meeting the business need. And so it becomes a better line between a provider and a consumer and a way to measure that. And so when you make that shift from a set of physical hardware or servers to a service level, it becomes an easier demarcation line, and it gives both sides more flexibility about how they meet their needs.
Right. Yeah, very good.
In the back.
Can you talk a little bit about how to balance everybody has their own data center to everybody has to move to a one-size-fits-all data center? How do we find that balance?
Hypnotize.
The hammer.
Well, I don't think you have to absolutely move to one data center. I mean, that's one thing. I think it's looking at what your inventory is And if you only have one now, it's looking at how well you operationally manage that and optimize and fine-tune it in a way that's meeting diverse needs. I don't think you, again, this is where a cloud solution begins to become more complicated, because you may have customer sets within your agency that have different requirements on the usage of data, the protection of data, the sharing of data. And so your data center is going to have to accommodate for that. But it doesn't mean that just because of that diversity, it doesn't mean you can't do some leveraging in cloud space. In fact, in a lot of cases, I think of the experience that we've had with test dev environments, backup and recovery, COOP, DR type stuff, that stuff is so incredibly cheap in the cloud environment with requirements that you put on it compared to what you might be able to do in-house, or you just simply don't have to worry about that production environment in the backup realm. There's somebody that's providing it to you as a service. I just think you have to really take a portfolio view of what's in your center, the applications in the center, and figure out these cloud slices, if there are any that really make sense, and optimize that way. Optimize your own data center. We were having a conversation with somebody earlier. I mean, a lot of cloud computing is simply virtualized data centers. That's all it is, but people are taking credit saying, I'm in the cloud. And, technically, that's why I think when you say you have a private cloud, it's only for your own single entity. Okay, you've got a private cloud, so be it. Are you getting huge cost economies out of it? Maybe not. So it's, again, not a one-size-fit-all type thing here. I think just be cognizant of that.
Another approach may be very similar to the federal government. So there are like three components, right? There's a policy component. I mentioned the 25-point implementation plan, which really talks about data center consolidation, right? Optimization. That's one component that could be a driver. The other one is providing the tools to the CIOs or to the heads of the agencies where they can conduct alternative analysis where the optimization makes business sense. So having that and the policy and then giving the flexibilities to the agencies, to have a phased approach where they can manage the risk and they can begin the consolidation process. Virtualization is an excellent example. I mean, this is, the agencies, the data centers, the standalone data centers, I mean, if you look at the average server utilization, I mean, that's typically fairly low. I mean, in the federal data centers, it's like I mentioned, 10 to 20%. The consolidation can begin right there and then. So there are a number of ways of approaching this.
Email, financial management, HR, don't forget about those areas. Even if you have an agency with multiple lines of business, I'd seriously ask some tough questions if you have 6 financial systems or 6 HR systems. So there's a lot of opportunities, and that's the next, I think that's where people are now going in the cloud space. They're into the common systems where there's definitely a case for multi-tenant type of provisioning. You're still going to break a lot of rice bowls in those areas, but that's just the reality of getting some cost savings.
It seems like moving to this technology, you really have to be integrated with your customer a lot more. I mean, you have to be not just, here's a physical server, it's yours, I give you permissions, and I'm done with you. I don't know what you do. To, I really have to understand what you need, and then I have to provide that service, and in the background I will just do it the way I do best. But IT has to move more into the business requirements area and to develop the platform they need to be able to, because that was my first question. What services do I know if you need a virtual machine, I can do that. Right. But way beyond that, are services that they need to get their job done. And
that's the paradigm shift, and that's the way it should be. I mean, IT exists not for the sake of IT. IT exists to serve the mission. So I loved one time the expression that the CFO at Treasury used. He said, "Oh, by the way, after implementing the modernization strategy, where we went through, having an engagement with the program offices, the business offices." He himself said, by the way, for the first time I'm seeing IT as a business enabler, not as a cost driver. I thought that was one of the highest compliments getting from the CFO. So, that's the way it should be.
Your comment makes me think of something that Dave said earlier today, which is you need to decide at some point which piece of the business do you want to be in, providing these services or consuming them, and then that partnership that goes along with your, for example, with the data centers clients or department clients. It also makes me think about being from the private sector aspect of this equation, what the level of partnership needs to be between the cloud service provider coming in from the private sector to partner with the state. But it also then begs the question, probably, and I'd like to hear what Vijender and Dave think about this, is of the controls in that area, of the roles and responsibilities in that area, what are some things that the private sector is particularly good at, and what are some things that perhaps these cloud service providers maybe aren't so good at?
I'll let you go first. My boss.
And I say this, by the way, full disclosure, we're a very important partner to the GSA, so maybe they're about to air some things I shouldn't have asked, but I'd really like to know what you think about that.
Well, I think it's not any different than when you're doing it in-house and you're looking at segregation of duties and you're looking at controls dealing with access. The biggest issue that we've confronted with cloud solutions in the federal government is actually clearance of workers who are accessing data. So if I contract with an external provider and in the contract provision it says they will have secure, authorized, cleared personnel with U.S. government clearances touching the data. And then we get into the implementation and oops, they haven't done that yet. And by the way, it costs more than we thought, and we're not sure it can happen for 6 or 8 more months. And so that is a huge issue. It's just background clearances, proper controls in place for people that actually are touching and manipulating your information. And there's not a good solution in place right now, other than, unfortunately, right now it's provider by provider discussions. We're trying to actually raise that up to the CIO level in the federal government and say we've got to come up with a better process government-wide to do this because it's killing us. But I think the roles and responsibilities area, the other thing I think is just asking the questions about segregation of duties, level of evidence that meet your test. What do you require for that? And what kind of inspection from a third-party assessment organization do you want in order to verify that these duties and responsibilities are there and they're actually being performed the way you require? I think that's just it's a tough space because it takes a lot of time for the provider and costs money for the provider to actually go through that additional type of verification.
So turnabout being fair play, I'll let Stefan ask.
No, I mean,
he's reaching for that microphone, people.
No, and those are good examples.
I was feeling it.
One of the things that, and this is not unique to cloud, right? Anytime you have technology and you talk about a proposition of sharing things, it becomes an issue of how much do I trust somebody else to be able to do the work. And that's unique to, not unique to cloud technology, that's true for everyday life. You ask my kids how much they want to share with other kids, I think they'll talk about, well, do I trust this person to do the right thing or not? One of the things on the federal side, there was, I think, a lot of political will to establish and spend a lot of time to establish that level of trust. And GSA, Department of Defense, and Department of Homeland Security got together and said, if the 3 of us can do this right, then there ought to be a pretty good level of trust from everybody else that they can jump on board. And so under Dave's leadership, the federal government has a very good collaboration, a very open decision-making process to assess risk, and imposes standards that anybody who wants to be a cloud partner from a commercial side with the federal government, we have to meet those standards. And the bar is very high, and rightfully so, given the type of data that you have that's flowing through some of these systems. But I think this notion that you take away this threshold of mistrust a little bit has made the adoption of cloud more of a business discussion than a technical discussion, because I as it was with data center consolidation, there's a reason there are now 2,000 data centers and there were 400. A lot of it has to do with the fact that if I can hug my servers and I can control the dials, then I feel a lot better about executing my mission than I did if I just give it to somebody else. So I think this culture of trust has made a huge difference, and that had nothing to do with technology, ironically.
I would like to add to that too. I mean, I think it's also about partnership. I mean, it's, I'm not the touchy-feely kind of guy, but I think at the end of the day, I mean, service providers and service receivers, the agencies, I mean, they have to work in partnership. There are some key challenges that the federal government faces, for that matter, most organizations face. For example, identity management, provisioning, leveraging the internet to access mission-critical application. I think that's an area that we've been trying to solve for a long time now. And I think this is where perhaps the private sector, can provide that best practices, that technology, the value added beyond just the contractual arrangement. And I think that establishes trust, that establishes partnership. So we would like to see more of that engagement.
I'd say two other areas that is important to bring up, sort of along these same lines, that we've learned in the early days has to do with largely infrastructure providers and figuring out where roles and responsibilities and level of responsibility lie in two ways. One, I think a lot of government agencies think when they go to a hosted cloud infrastructure provider, they may think they're automatically getting system administration, configuration management, and everything else. And you may not. I mean, again, you got to pay attention to what you're buying and what you're negotiating. If you want those services, as when we first got into this, we did our own system admin, we did our own everything, and we just went to a cloud infrastructure provider. We realized how inefficient that was and changed it. But we had to learn, there was a trust issue. There was a control issue that we had to just get comfortable with in that environment. The other example is between an infrastructure provider and an application provider. I might buy infrastructure for storage and processing, and then I go out and start buying SaaS all over the place, and I say, well, you park it over in CGI. And the interrelationship between roles and responsibilities on what happens in that environment. Is it software or is it infrastructure that's causing performance problems is really a difficult thing to work through. It's true in any data center operation, but it's accentuated in cloud environments because of the mystique of buying a cloud service. Well, I thought you did it all, or I thought you were responsible for X, Y, and Z.
Dave, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So I'm just saying, you need to be extremely clear with yourself and your provider on who's doing what, who's responsible for what, because those issues will come up, I guarantee you.
Dave has, I think, opened up a really critical topic around the procurement of these services. And, not to steal the thunder of, I think, a session that's going to follow this. And by the way, the quick plug is that both Vijender and Dave will be joining Jim Butler and some others in a cloud procurement session at 2 o'clock. So the session immediately following this where they'll dive deeper into procurement.
I will be in the
issues.
audience.
Oh, you'll be in the audience. You'll stay away from that one. Stay away from that one.
Thank you.
One might say, and they might be right, that the current procurement process is not necessarily optimized and set up to procure cloud services. Right. What does the state, what do buying authorities need to do to change the way that they procure in order to leverage the approach that you've just described?
Well, we're not set up to do elastic supply and demand.
Right.
The procurement is usually a fixed price procurement for X amount of capacity. We've had to get around that by putting caps or ceilings and saying we can operate within this range, but we don't have a completely elastic pricing or elastic supply and demand situation because the procurement vehicles just simply don't allow it. So we know we have to address that, and it will be tough because it's breaking federal acquisition rules and creating a whole nother dialogue on policy changes and discussion around risk and everything else. I think that's probably one of the key ones is the elasticity in pricing and how that works in a fixed price procurement environment. There are other nuances as well. I think this services versus just core commodity buying is something else that we've struggled with. I think we'll probably bring this up in the next session about a cloud service broker idea that's floating around because it's very difficult to know what services do I need to package so that I'm getting the right kind of capability for the cloud solution I think I'm buying. We find that even ourselves we don't feel we have all of the insight and knowledge to do that, and maybe we don't have the resources to devote to it. So there are cloud brokering ideas both from an acquisition management perspective, a buying perspective, and a value perspective on how to array services in a way that truly address your business needs, that the current procurement process segments that into different buying options, or an integrator comes in and provides all of it, but they don't necessarily have the expertise truly across all those areas.
To follow on that, can you talk about how you guys have been able to get to a point that you can go back to the people you provide the cloud services for and tell them exactly what it's costing? Because you shared this environment across agencies and with yourselves, you get funding from different components. So how do you break that back out and show them what's there?
Yeah, we do show them, and it's not a pretty picture at times because people realize they are now in a shared environment.
Right.
So maybe the cost isn't what they thought it was going to be or what we thought it was going to be. Or maybe they're on the user side a high user, or maybe they're a moderate user, and they want to know, well, what's everybody else pricing in this? So the transparency does mean that you have to be absolutely confident that you could go into a customer on your business side and say, here's your hosting environment, your application environment, here's the cost for this, here's the formulas that we use to derive those costs, and it's at least fair, reasonable, and can pass that test. If you can't explain it, then you're in trouble.
But you're rate-based.
Yeah, but I mean, in a lot of our situations, we have one fund funding a lot of projects with multiple stakeholders who want the best possible use of that money. They don't realize that they're not in their own system, their own servers even. They're in a shared environment now. So part of the efficiency is across the portfolio, not necessarily everybody getting maximum ROI like they think they would.
And that will require a whole different approach to cost allocation.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Whole
Yeah, it
different
would,
approach.
absolutely. It creates
Yeah.
real huge problems for
Huge
cost
problem.
allocation
I have
models.
one quick one.
Sure, I think there's one here and then also one in the back. So, sir, please.
I just wondered, what do you get back? You have an SLA with your customer. What do you actually get back to them? Do they get dashboards? Do they get report to sort of make them feel comfortable that the service you're delivering is meeting SLAs and it's up 99.9%? I mean, green, red, but whatever. What do you give back to the customer to validate the service levels?
So, I mean, I can give an example of that. Back at the OCC, I mean, we used the dashboard, actually. And so we had actually set up an organization to independently monitor the performance against the SLAs with the CSPs. And as part of the sort of the quarterly program management reviews with the business units, we showed them that, you know, here are the metrics, you know, on the SLAs and how they were independently measured and monitored, and where the CSPs exceeded, and therefore there were some financial incentives tied to that, and the areas of the metrics where they were below the thresholds and the disincentives, and quite frankly, I mean, that database decision, you know, went a long ways in providing the level of transparency and also in education to the business units that, oh yeah, okay, so this is how cloud service providers and service levels can work to the benefit of the agencies and the program officers. So that level of transparency was extremely critical.
I think it's the three golden rules, no matter what you're doing, cloud or non-cloud, to a business partner is time, cost, and quality. If you can show that you can provision faster than you were able to do before because of the environment that you're in, that the cost or what you've been able to lower cost and provide efficiencies compared to what was there. And quality is, you know, one of those areas where there's a basket of measures. You know, are they happy with performance? Do they like the results? Are their business needs actually getting accomplished? So, you know, create that time, cost, quality view from a business perspective, and you're okay. I think you're answering the mail if you can do that.
Yeah. Sorry, I just want to make sure we had a question in the back.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, besides SLAs, what other tools do you use to manage cloud service providers?
Sledgehammers, saws. Yeah. There is, again, I don't know if you were in the prior session, there is a couple of white papers that we've produced on contracting. So there's a whole set of contracting issues that are completely separate from security and privacy controls that really you have to pay attention to in the cloud environment. Again, eFOIA, records management, looking at e-discovery capabilities, all the things that you're meeting in your government requirements for. If you want to move it into a cloud environment, they don't get to pass. So there is a definite checklist. Data location. If your data has to be stored within Sonoma County, Los Angeles County, state of California, continental U.S., you better have that very well explained. And those are just key issues I think we've had to learn that you've got to put into contract clauses. They're completely separate from, security. It might be related to some of the security and privacy testing, but it's a completely different set of documents that you have to really pay attention to.
I'll add one thought to that from a provider perspective. I think with the FedRAMP program, there came a very rigorous due diligence that is executed not by each of, in our case, our customer, right? Each government agency individually and differently, but executed by a very rigorous set of standards that are monitored not by every agency themselves, but by a pool of third-party certified, cloud assessors, maybe, is not in the tax sense, auditors. And so that's an ongoing process that I think has equaled the playing field, so that when you think about buying services, you know that there's a minimum set of requirements that are not just on some marketing brochure, right? But that really have been tested and the tires have been kicked, and the capability doesn't have to not just exist on some PowerPoint slide, but really has to be demonstrated. It's a costly process in some ways for the government to execute that level of due diligence, but I think it really has taken a lot of pressure off of some of the concerns. And from a provider side, I think it's given a lot of good guidance on where to prioritize.
Yeah.
And so it's helped, I think, everybody.
Yeah, I think what we try to do is create a baseline set of contract provisions, baseline set of SLAs, baseline set of security controls, baseline set of privacy controls. If we can, and all government agencies have to adhere to those. It's not an option on the security and privacy side. Contracting is guidance, but on the privacy and security, you must demonstrate that that your solution provider has done that. There can be other things above it. You can be below it if you can make the case, but the baseline is the baseline, and that has simplified and actually demystified a lot of this because people don't have. Security officers are not put in the position of, I don't know what, I'll just do it all. That's what we've been doing in the federal government. We've been doing, in some cases, 1,000 controls when the baseline is around 299. So it's trying to bring some rationality to that and recognize there's still variances. But if you can take the baseline and GSAs conform to the baseline, other agencies can then use that ATO and don't have to spend, on average, $250,000, $500,000, $1 million to require a vendor to retest all of that again just because it's my responsibility, not somebody else's. That's just huge.
I encourage each of you to go to FedRAMP.gov and to learn more. It seems like every week I read 2 or 3 more articles about the importance and aspects of security as we move to the cloud. And so please jump into that.
Can you write that down?
Oh, sure. I'll do it just 1 second because we do need to close up. It seems that we could spend whole sessions on each of these topics. I wish that I could replicate you, brethren, and keep you here in Sacramento as we enter the season of cloud implementation. Thank you for joining this session. If you'd like to spend more time, certainly with Dave, I guess Vijender will be with me in the audience. Go to the procurement session next where we'll be talking more about procurement strategies around this. But thank you very much for joining and for your questions. I'll write the FedRAMP. It's FedRAMP, one word, FedRAMP.gov, but I'll write it down.